She became a Secret Service special agent at 22, one of the youngest female agents ever hired. Her upcoming book, Agent Innocent, shares her fascinating story along with some of the more difficult personal struggles that accompany an agent's career. I'm sure you'll enjoy my next guest, Melanie Lentz. Melanie, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
First question, how long were you with the Secret Service? And give us an idea as to what that looked like.
I was with the Secret Service for a little over 9 years. I started in 2007 at age 22. And most agents' careers start in one of the field offices across the country. People think that Secret Service is around the president in DC, but we have field offices everywhere, and that's where agents typically get some protection and investigation experience. So when I got out of training, I was assigned to the Los Angeles field office, and I was there for about 8 years. I started out working little bank fraud cases because the Secret Service works financial crime investigations alongside our protective mission. So I started there, and then I moved on to a cyber squad where we worked electronic crimes, which is a lot similar to fraud because so much of financial crime is digital and online now. And then after that, I spent a couple years working protective intelligence investigations, which means we were investigating threats against the Secret Service protectees. So, for example, if somebody posted a Facebook threat like they wanted to bomb the White House and it originated in Los Angeles, my squad would go out and work that investigation. And then my next squad in Los Angeles, we bounce around a little bit, was in the protection operations squad. So I kind of worked logistics for protection assignments in Los Angeles. LA is a big tourist trap for foreign heads of state, which the Secret Service also protects. So anytime somebody would, a foreign head of state would come into Los Angeles to go to Disneyland or Universal Studios, that sort of thing, we would help coordinate that and use our local agents to go out and prep these security plans and run the motorcade routes and that sort of thing. So on top of all of that, anytime the president wanted to travel or there was a presidential campaign, like in 2008, 2012, while I was there, I would bounce around all over the country working fundraising sites or running routes, motorcade routes for one of the candidates who's doing a rally somewhere in the United States. So it's definitely a crazy busy life, and the Los Angeles field office kept me quite busy, and I got a lot of experience in the protection realm for my first 8 years. And after agents work some time in the field office, then you transfer to Washington, D.C. to be on the president or vice president's detail. And that's a big decision because agents kind of know that you have to relocate probably several times throughout your career if you want to move up and move on. But in my particular case, I was married at the time, and moving across country was going to be a little bit difficult on the home front. And there was an opening on former First Lady Nancy Reagan's detail, and the Secret Service also protects former presidents and former First Ladies after they're out of office. So I was able to get a slot on Nancy Reagan's detail in 2015, which allowed me to stay in Los Angeles to try to keep the personal life rolling smoothly. And I was there with Nancy Reagan until she passed away the following year in March 2016, and kept me quite busy all that time. But I made the decision to leave the agency shortly after Nancy Reagan died. But my career kind of went that route.
So it's a high stress, high demand, potentially dangerous career that you signed up for. What was it like being a woman working in this sort of male-dominated a career that you chose with all of those sorts of extra demands put on top of it?
Right. Well, for me, the Secret Service is mostly male. Obviously, there's probably about 90% male. So being a female makes you stand out. But I felt more like I stood out more because of my age. I was 22 and I looked 18. So I think I felt I had more to prove because of my age, more so than being a female. I definitely had the attitude that I wasn't going to give anybody a reason to think I couldn't do this job. I was an athlete in college. My background was in fitness. So I worked really, really hard trying to keep up with the boys, for lack of a better way of saying it in that regard. But for me, I just kept practicing at what I was deficient at, where some of the guys in my class were military or law enforcement before. So simple things like handcuffing were a piece of cake to them. They could do that in their sleep. But me, as a 22-year-old college graduate, had never done that before. So I think for me, it was just being too stubborn to quit, and a type A perfectionist that I was just, I'm not going to give anybody a reason to think I can't do this job. And I think that attitude worked well in the next 9 years for me. But it was more my age that I felt the more pressure because of my age.
So you mentioned Nancy Reagan, and then you said shortly after that you left the Secret Service. Why? What's the correlation there? Why did you do that?
Well, any honest Secret Service agent will tell you that balancing your home life and your personal life is pretty darn near impossible to do effectively 100% of the time. By the time I went to Nancy Reagan's detail, my marriage was in shambles. I had developed a lot of really bad habits early in my career, like going to work sick, never taking a vacation, always feeling the need to be the team player and volunteer for everything. So when Nancy Reagan died, it was pretty sudden because she was in relatively good health. I hadn't, it wasn't a lot of notice, I guess, in that regard. So I didn't realize that the morning she passed away that was going to be a catalyst to some huge changes in my life and some big decisions that I was going to have to make for the first time by myself. I'd had a spouse to help me with those big life decisions, and now I was by myself. But when she passed away, I got that call that morning, and 2 hours later, I'm at a funeral home standing in an embalming room, which is something as an agent you never think you're going to have to do, but you forget that once the person you're protecting passes away, you're still there until they're laid to rest. So being in an embalming room is something that's going to prompt a lot of life reflection, I guess. It sounds morbid to say, but it was one of those weeks where between all of the private family funeral and her official memorial service, I was just doing a whole lot of thinking, and I was feeling so sorry for myself. I was playing the victim. I'm getting divorced. I'm super depressed. Now Nancy Reagan has to pass away on me. What's going to happen to my career? And I'm standing at her memorial service, the official memorial service, and I'm listening to all these people talk about her huge capacity to love, that despite all political opinions, scandals, relationships, she was leaving a legacy of love. And I thought, well, that kind of prompted me to think, well, where am I going? Who am I becoming? Because not morbid, like, what do I want people to say about me at my funeral kind of thoughts, but I'm a stranger to myself in the mirror. I never wanted to become this workaholic, depressed, divorced person I've become. What happened to that 22-year-old who was going to conquer the world and, save the president with her pinky toe kind of thing. So when she passed away, I got transfer orders to Washington, D.C. I was going to finish my protection time on the president or the vice president's detail in Washington, D.C. And I had some big decisions to make because I had only a short window between when the transfer orders came out and when I had to report to D.C. And the more I thought about it and the more I realized I have to make some changes in my life. I don't want to keep going down this road. I don't like who I'm becoming. And that was a big gut punch because I did a lot of very uncharacteristic things in those few months, like quitting my job and selling my house and basically starting over in my 30s because I had lost track of who I wanted to be and who I wanted to become. And I'm so grateful to the Secret Service. A lot of people think, oh, well, they screwed you over because they were going to force you to DC. That's not the case. I'm so grateful because I learned so much. I mean, how many people can go back and say they, basically became a grown-up in the Secret Service and got to see so many cool things. But it was the toughest decision aside from ending my marriage to leave my job. And I just, it sounds weird to say I credit Nancy Reagan, but I credit a lot of the life lessons and the things that I learned after her passing with making the right decision for me, as opposed to protecting other people. I'm choosing to protect myself, which is something I did very poorly up until that point. Well,
you've turned things around. You learned a lot from your time with the Secret Service. Share some things that perhaps college graduates or new mothers or career-minded women might be able to use that you've learned from your time with the Secret Service.
Well, I learned so much. We could talk for days, but I've narrowed it down to 3 big lessons that kind of those 3 things I wish I knew at 22 when I was starting the academy. Then the first one is, we've talked briefly about, is about legacy. Is when you find yourself going down a path you don't like and you're becoming somebody you don't want to be, you need to stop and reevaluate where you're going. And Nancy Reagan did that for me. That was probably the biggest lesson, because in doing that, I was able to finally stop playing the victim in all of this and own my part in what happened to my life in the decade before. And in doing so, I was able to realize the concept of protection that I had been surrounded by for the past 9 years was something I really needed to implement in my own life. In the Secret Service, protecting other people is always going to trump protecting any semblance of your personal life. But I needed to realize that I needed to start protecting myself. And the way I learned to do that was to remember concepts that the Secret Service uses, like access control. That's the fundamental concept of protection. Who gets access to your protectee and who needs it, who doesn't need it, etc. But in my life, I just was a giver. I just give. Anybody can take and have access because I want to be seen as this giver, this servant's heart, this kind heart. But in reality, as a woman in the workplace, I didn't practice very good self-respect, or access control, as I like to call it, because I didn't have enough self-respect to recognize when somebody's access to me maybe needed to be denied or limited, sometimes revoked. And in the process, I shut down. I'm not going to get hurt again, but sometimes positive access needs to be granted. So the concept of access control is huge in my life now, because as I'm growing and becoming the woman I want to be, I need to be open and receptive to positive access and know when the negative access needs to be revoked. And the more I talk about, the more that I find people relate to that, is that we all kind of find ourselves in a situation where we've just allowed some things to get at us that we shouldn't. So I wish I knew that at 22. I wish I had that fundamental access control concept. The third one, so legacy, access control, and the third one is, I call it the situation reports. In motorcades with the Secret Service, there's communication going on the radios and telephones between the agents at your destination and the motorcade, because the motorcade needs updates. A situation report is a status updates of sorts. Your arrival area is clear. You have a small demonstration 2 blocks away. You have 3 greeters at arrival. Just kind of the snippets of intel that are nuggets that you need to know when you arrive. And when you're about to arrive, that situation report needs to be all clear for arrival, because if it's not, we're not coming. But for me, I liken situation reports to self-awareness. I gave myself an all clear situation report for many, many years. I was a workaholic. I was depressed. I was so sad. I didn't sleep. I didn't see my family. My marriage suffered, but I'm all okay. It's so easy for us in the workplace, at least for me as a woman, to say, I'm fine. I'm always fine. I got this. Until you find yourself divorced, depressed, you've got a transfer order, and you realize I'm not fine. And I ended up calling basically what the equivalent of the Secret Service helpline that they have for agents. Those things on the bulletin board you think will never apply to you. But that's me, the 1-800 number. My life is falling apart. I need help. And I thought that was my weakest point as a woman. I've got a transfer. My marriage is in shambles. But that was my strongest, I know now, that was one of my strongest moments as a woman, was saying, I need help. I'm not all clear. My situation report is not all clear. And those 3 lessons for me were huge as I move forward, starting over in my 30s. And I wouldn't have learned those in quite that way if it weren't for the Secret Service. So, looking back, I don't have, it's not poor memories, or I wish it was all just fun and games and all these crazy cool stories about meeting celebrities and traveling. But I came away with 3 pretty big concepts that are helping me move forward into somebody I want to be in the future. So I'm forever grateful for that.
Melanie, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story and your advice.
Thank you for having me. It was great talking. talking with you.
All right, visit melanielentz.com to sign up for her newsletter and get information on her book, Agent Innocent.